Admiral Kaal'Vex smoothed down the iridescent scales along his neck crest, a nervous habit he'd developed during the 17 rotations of this blasted war. The holographic display before him showed the current state of Solarian Federation territories, with far too much red indicating Nexus Dominion encroachment. He flicked a clawed finger through the projection, scattering light particles across his command chamber. "By the 7 moons they've taken the Pelora mining outpost," he muttered, watching as another sector blinked from blue to red. "That's the 3rd resource hub this quarter." His second-in-command, Commander Listura, stood rigid by the doorway. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep concern among their species. "Admiral, the High Council is demanding progress. The war effort has depleted our treasury by 73%. As civilians are growing restless." Kaal'Vex laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Progress? We lose ground daily while our politicians debate color schemes for the victory parade that will never come." He dismissed the hologram with a swipe. "What news of the peace talks?" Listura approached, her ceremonial armor clicking softly with each step. "The Nexus Dominion has agreed to meet on Station Harmony. They're sending Grand Marshal Kaal'Vex himself." Kaal'Vex? That bloodthirsty space slug? Kaal'Vex's neck frills extended fully, displaying his agitation. "He won't negotiate. He'll gloat and demand our unconditional surrender." "Perhaps. But the Galactic Council has insisted on these talks." Listura paused, her lower eyes narrowing. "There's more. The humans have requested to send an observer." Kaal'Vex froze. "Humans? What business do they have in our affairs?" "Apparently their diplomatic corps considers this a learning opportunity." The disdain in her voice was unmistakable. "The council approved their request. Some ambassador named Thomas Blackwood." "Wonderful," Kaal'Vex drawled, his tail twitching in annoyance. "A primitive species barely 2 centuries into space travel, and they think they can learn galactic diplomacy by watching us negotiate with barbarians." He pulled up the human's file on his data terminal. The image showed a pale-skinned being with dark hair and what humans called a beard, an inexplicable patch of facial fur that made them look like underdeveloped Krantari beasts. According to his file, Thomas Blackwood had served in something called the United Nations before joining the Human Stellar Alliance's diplomatic service. "Look at him," Listura. "No scales for protection, no claws for defense, skin as fragile as parchment. How did they even survive long enough to develop space travel?" "They breed quickly," Listura offered, studying the file, "and adapt faster than most species. The science division finds them interesting." "Well, I find them annoying. But if the council insists Kaal'Vex closed the file, brief me on this human's credentials. What makes him qualified to observe the potential end of our civilization?" "He's reportedly an expert in conflict resolution, though their species has a curious history of resolving conflicts by creating bigger ones." Listura's upper eyes blinked in what might have been amusement. "Their diplomatic protocols are inconsistent at best." Kaal'Vex stared out the viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, the Nexus Dominion was preparing to crush what remained of the Federation. And now he had to babysit a human while fighting for his people's survival. "Station Harmony," he snorted. "What a tragically inappropriate name for what's about to happen there. Prepare my shuttle, Commander. Let's get this farce underway, and make arrangements for our observer. I want him kept away from anything sensitive. Humans have wandering eyes and even more wandering fingers." As Listura departed, Kaal'Vex returned to the holographic display. The human would watch, perhaps take notes, and return to his homeworld with tales of how an ancient spacefaring civilization handled its demise with dignity. Blackwood would be nothing more than a footnote in this debacle. Or so he thought. Station Harmony lived up to its name in architecture, if nothing else. The vast circular chamber where the peace talks were to be held featured sweeping arches of luminescent metal that curved upward to meet at a central point. resembling the ancient prayer temples of Kaal'Vex's homeworld. What a shame such beauty would witness such ugliness. Kaal'Vex and his delegation arrived first, as was proper according to Galactic diplomatic protocol. His team consisted of 3 senior military strategists and 2 civilian representatives from the High Council. And then there was the human, Thomas Blackwood, who had joined them on the journey from Federation space. Up close, the human was even less impressive than his file suggested. Average height for his species, which made him notably shorter than most beings in the room, with none of the natural advantages that evolution had granted to truly advanced species. No armored hide, no enhanced senses that Kaal'Vex could detect. Just soft flesh wrapped in a crisp blue suit that Blackwood had called his diplomatic uniform. Your observation post will be there. Kaal'Vex indicated a small desk positioned at the periphery of the chamber. You'll have full audio access, but please remember you are here solely to observe. Do not interact with the Dominion representatives. They consider most species beneath their notice, but they find humans particularly distasteful. Understood, Admiral, Blackwood replied with a peculiar upward curve of his lips that humans called a smile. I'll be as quiet as a mouse. At Kaal'Vex's confused head tilt, he added, a small earth rodent, known for being silent. Yes, well be that. The station's neutral alert system chimed, announcing the arrival of the Nexus Dominion delegation. Grand Marshal Drell Kaal'Vex entered first, his massive form nearly filling the doorway. Standing 3 meters tall with armored plating across his torso and heavy ridges protecting his skull, the Nexus leader was a living weapon. His 6 attendants were similarly imposing, all bearing the ritual scars of warriors who had earned their positions through combat rather than diplomacy. In Federation weaklings, Drell Kaal'Vex's translator boomed as he stomped toward the central table. We expected you to send a surrender delegation, not a negotiation team. Kaal'Vex forced his neck frills to remain flat, suppressing his instinctive display of aggression. Grand Marshal, the Federation appreciates your willingness to discuss terms for a peaceful resolution to our conflict. Drell Kaal'Vex laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. There is no conflict. There is only your inevitable defeat. His 4 yellow eyes scanned the room, then narrowed when they landed on Blackwood. What is that soft thing in the corner? Have you brought a pet to these talks? From his peripheral vision, Kaal'Vex noticed Blackwood calmly taking notes on a small electronic pad, seemingly unbothered by the insult. His face revealed nothing a skill Kaal'Vex hadn't expected from such an expressive species. That is Ambassador Blackwood of Earth. He is here as an observer with Galactic Council approval, Kaal'Vex explained coolly. Ah yes, the humans, one of Drell Kaal'Vex's officers sneered. The species that still fights with projectile weapons on half their colonies. How quaint. Again, Blackwood showed no reaction, just continued making notes. Kaal'Vex found himself strangely impressed by the human's composure. The talks proceeded predictably poorly. The Dominion representatives made outrageous demands, complete surrender of all Federation territories in the outer spiral, unrestricted access to Federation technology archives, and the ceremonial execution of the Federation's top 3 military leaders, Kaal'Vex included. These terms are obviously unacceptable, Kaal'Vex stated after 2 grueling hours of back and forth. The Federation is prepared to discuss border realignments and limited resource sharing agreements, but nothing more. Drell Kaal'Vex slammed his massive fist on the table, cracking its polished surface. Your ancestors were cowards who fled rather than fight when the ancient purge came. Your entire species exists because you hid while others died defending the galaxy. You deserve extinction now as you deserved it then. A collective gasp went through the Federation delegation. The ancient purge was sacred history, the time when their ancestors had indeed retreated to the safety of the 7th Nebula, while a coalition of other species fought back an anti-extragalactic invasion. It was the great shame of their people, one they had spent millennia trying to atone for through peacekeeping and diplomacy. Kaal'Vex felt his scales flush with heat. His tail went rigid with fury. He was about to abandon all protocol and respond with equal venom when a calm voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me. I wonder if I might make an observation." All heads turned toward Thomas Blackwood, who had risen from his seat, datapad in hand. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, as if he'd just commented on the room's temperature. "You," Kaal'Vex growled. "The silent watcher speaks? What could a human possibly contribute to matters beyond its comprehension?" Blackwood's calm expression never wavered. "With the Admiral's permission, of course." Kaal'Vex found himself nodding, curiosity temporarily overriding protocol. "Granted, Ambassador. Though I remind you that your role is observational." "Yes, Admiral. But sometimes the best observations come from unexpected perspectives." Blackwood stepped forward, and somehow, despite being the smallest being in the room, every eye was drawn to him. "I believe I've noticed something that might be relevant to these negotiations." All eyes remained fixed on Thomas Blackwood as he casually approached the negotiation table. The human moved with an unconcerned grace that seemed almost insulting in such a tense diplomatic setting. "First, I must thank Grand Marshal Kaal'Vex for his hospitality during my brief visit to Nexus Prime last solar cycle," Blackwood began conversationally. The ceremonial hunt was particularly illuminating. Kaal'Vex blinked in confusion. There was no record of any human visiting the heavily fortified Nexus homeworld. Such a trip would have been mentioned in Blackwood's file. Yet the Grand Marshal's reaction, a momentary widening of all four eyes, suggested there might be truth to the claim. "You were never on Nexus Prime," Kaal'Vex growled, but his usual confidence had faltered. Blackwood chuckled, a warm sound entirely at odds with the hostile environment. "Come now, Marshal. Surely you remember the delegation from Sector 9? I was the one who complimented your collection of Andromeda skull trophies. Quite impressive, especially considering that 3 of them appeared to be replicas." The chamber went utterly silent. Kaal'Vex noticed 2 of Kaal'Vex's officers exchange worried glances. The trophy collection was apparently a closely guarded secret, and the suggestion that some were fake seemed to hit a nerve. "But I digress," Blackwood continued, pacing slowly around the table. "I merely wanted to point out that the Marshal's invocation of the ancient purge is fascinating given the Dominion's own historical response to that crisis. According to the 7th Codex of Nexus history, it was War Master Grok Thal who ordered the withdrawal of Dominion forces from the Cygnus front, leaving the Tellurian alliance to face the brunt of the invasion." Kaal'Vex surged to his feet, claws extending. "The 7th Codex is forbidden knowledge. No outsider has access to." "Oh, my sincere apologies," Blackwood interrupted, looking genuinely contrite. "Is that classified? How embarrassing. Human diplomats are terrible with remembering which atrocities are public and which are swept under the rug. We have this saying on Earth about pots and kettles, but cultural idioms rarely translate well, do they?" One of the Dominion officers, a female with elaborate facial markings, leaned toward Kaal'Vex and whispered urgently in their native tongue. Kaal'Vex couldn't understand the words, but the alarm in her tone was unmistakable. Blackwood tilted his head slightly, and Kaal'Vex caught a subtle change in the human's posture, a minute shift that somehow conveyed he had understood every word of the whispered exchange. "While we're discussing history," Blackwood said cheerfully, "I find it curious that the Grand Marshal wears the crest of valor despite the well-documented incident at the Battle of Raxus. Perhaps the term tactical retreat has different connotations in Dominion military doctrine?" Kaal'Vex's face contorted with rage. "You dare question my honor?" he roared. "Question?" "No," Blackwood replied, examining his fingernails with exaggerated interest. "I'm simply making observations. That's my job, after all." He glanced up with an innocent expression. "For instance, I observed that Officer Nexvala appears quite uncomfortable, whenever resource allocation for the outer territories is mentioned. Is there trouble in the supply chain I'm unaware of? The officer in question, a previously stoic warrior who hadn't spoken once, visibly flinched. Kaal'Vex watched in fascination as Blackwood moved around the chamber, asking seemingly innocuous questions that somehow struck like precision weapons. Each query revealed knowledge the human shouldn't possess and exposed apparent fractures within the Dominion leadership. Even more remarkable was how Blackwood maintained an air of polite curiosity throughout, as if he were discussing the weather rather than laying bare state secrets. After a particularly pointed observation about breeding patterns among the Dominion's ruling caste, Kaal'Vex abruptly stood. His massive frame trembled with barely contained fury, or was it fear? "We require a recess," he announced stiffly. "1 standard hour." Without waiting for a response, the Dominion delegation filed out, their earlier confidence notably diminished. As they left, Kaal'Vex noticed they maintained unusual distance from Blackwood, as though the small human had suddenly become dangerous. When the doors sealed behind them, Kaal'Vex turned to Blackwood, who was calmly returning to his observation post. "What," Kaal'Vex demanded, "just happened?" "What just happened?" Kaal'Vex repeated, his neck frills fully extended in a display of agitation. The rest of the Federation delegation had retreated to a side chamber, leaving him alone with the human. "You were supposed to observe, not provoke a diplomatic crisis. How do you know those things about the Dominion? And do not tell me you actually visited Nexus Prime." Blackwood smiled, but this time the expression didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't. That was a calculated risk based on intelligence analysis." "Intelligence analysis? You're a diplomatic observer." "I am a diplomat," Blackwood corrected, settling into a chair and gesturing for Kaal'Vex to join him. "But humans don't separate diplomacy from other forms of influence. Your file described you as a student of galactic history, Admiral. Tell me, what do you know about Earth's diplomatic evolution?" Kaal'Vex reluctantly sat across from the human. "Your species spent millennia fighting amongst yourselves before achieving unified government. Not unusual for pre-FTL civilizations." "And what else?" Blackwood prompted, his voice taking on a teacher's patience. "You developed nuclear weapons, nearly destroyed yourselves, then somehow pulled back from the brink. After first contact with the Arcturian coalition, you joined the galactic community with surprising speed." Kaal'Vex narrowed his eyes. "What is your point, human?" "My point, Admiral, is that human diplomacy was forged in the fires of potential extinction. We never had the luxury of treating diplomacy as separate from warfare." Blackwood leaned forward, suddenly intense. "During our Cold War period, we developed an entirely new battlefield, the psychological domain. We learned to weaponize information, to understand the enemy so thoroughly that we could predict their actions, manipulate their decisions, and if necessary, destroy their cohesion without firing a single shot." A chill ran down Kaal'Vex's spine ridge. "You're saying you've been what? Analyzing them psychologically?" "From the moment I received this assignment." Blackwood pulled out his datapad and slid it across the table. "I've compiled psychological profiles on each member of the Dominion delegation, mapped their hierarchy, identified their personal and professional pressure points, and analyzed the fractures in their political alliance." Kaal'Vex stared at the screen in disbelief. The datapad displayed intricate relationship maps, behavioral analyses, and vulnerability assessments for each Dominion representative far more detailed than anything Federation intelligence had compiled in years of war. "This is impossible," he whispered. "You've been with us for less than a standard week." "Humans are observant," Blackwood said with a shrug. "We evolved as pattern recognition specialists. It's almost compulsive for us. While your intelligence services focus on intercepting communications and gathering technological data, we focus on the beings themselves, their habits, their responses, their micro-expressions, the things they try to hide." Blackwood stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. Did you notice how Drell Kaal'Vex's upper right eye twitches when he's lying? Or how Officer Nexvala positions herself slightly apart from the others? The Dominion presents itself as a monolithic power. But it's actually a fragile coalition held together by Drell Kaal'Vex's force of personality and a series of tenuous alliances. 3 of his officers come from rival clans that have historically opposed his family's rule. They're loyal to him personally, not to the Dominion as a concept. How could you possibly know that from just watching them? Kaal'Vex demanded. I didn't. I combined observation with research. Human diplomatic protocol includes extensive background preparation. Blackwood turned back to face him. For instance, I know that your species has 3 eyelids, but you only blink the 3rd one when you're genuinely surprised, as you're doing now. Kaal'Vex consciously stopped his 3rd eyelid from flickering. What exactly is your plan, Blackwood? To help you win this negotiation. By antagonizing the most powerful military force in this sector, they could walk away from these talks entirely. They won't, Blackwood said with absolute certainty. Because I've planted seeds of doubt that will now grow in their absence. Drell Kaal'Vex is wondering how I know what I know. He's questioning his officers' loyalty. They, in turn, are questioning his competence. Divide and conquer. Admiral. An ancient human strategy that still works across species lines. Kaal'Vex studied the small, physically unimposing human before him. There was nothing outwardly threatening about Blackwood, and yet he suddenly seemed as dangerous as any weapon in the Federation arsenal. Your species is terrifying, Kaal'Vex said quietly. We prefer effective, Blackwood replied with another smile. Now, shall we prepare for their return? They'll come back with a completely different approach, and we need to be ready. As they began strategizing, Kaal'Vex couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that he was watching the evolution of warfare itself, a form of combat that happened entirely within minds and perceptions. And humans, it seemed, were its masters. The Dominion delegation returned exactly 1 standard hour later, their formation noticeably different. Where before they had entered as a unified front with Drell Kaal'Vex at the center, now they filed in separately, with subtle but telling distance between them. Kaal'Vex exchanged a meaningful glance with Blackwood, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. We are prepared to continue these negotiations, Drell Kaal'Vex announced, his usual bombastic tone somewhat subdued. However, the human observer will return to his designated position. Actually, Kaal'Vex said, finding confidence he hadn't felt in years of warfare, I've invited Ambassador Blackwood to join our delegation as a special advisor for this session. The Galactic Council protocols permit such adjustments with mutual consent. We do not consent, snarled one of the Dominion officers, a heavily scarred warrior. Kaal'Vex now knew to be from a rival clan to Drell Kaal'Vex. Interesting objection, Commander Turak, Blackwood remarked casually. Especially considering your previous stance on external mediation during the Sigma cluster dispute. If I recall correctly, you voted in favor of bringing in Andromeda observers during that particular conflict against the Grand Marshal's wishes. Turak froze, then slowly turned toward Drell Kaal'Vex, whose massive jaw had clenched tight. That was a different situation, Turak muttered. Of course it was, Blackwood agreed amiably, taking a seat at the main negotiation table. Just as this is a different situation from the failed accord at Rigel 7. You know, I've always found it fascinating how leadership dynamics shift during prolonged conflicts. Take the Dominion's campaign against the Orion Confederacy, for example. Started under one supreme commander, ended under another. Regime change in the middle of a war is always so messy. Every Dominion officer stiffened. The supreme commander position was above even Drell Kaal'Vex, and rumors of succession struggles were evidently sensitive. You know nothing of our internal matters, Drell Kaal'Vex growled, but his eyes darted briefly toward his officers. Perhaps not, Blackwood conceded, shuffling through some data files. Though I did enjoy studying the different command philosophies among your officer corps. Commander Nexvala's tactical brilliance at the Battle of Vega Prime stands in such contrast to the more conservative approach favored by Central Command. Those supply chain innovations you implemented saved thousands of Dominion lives, didn't they, Commander? Nexvala straightened with obvious pride. The modified distribution protocol increased efficiency by 73%. A protocol that was denied 3 times by Central Command before you implemented it anyway, Blackwood added, as if merely clarifying a historical footnote. Quite the risk to your career. Fortunate that it succeeded. Drell Korvic's head snapped toward Nexvala. You circumvented command authority? Before she could respond, Blackwood continued. Oh, speaking of command decisions, I've been meaning to ask about the Arcturian border incident. The official report cited equipment malfunction, but Officer Vrex's personal log indicated. Enough, roared another Dominion officer, rising to his feet. This human speaks of matters he cannot know. Cannot, or should not? Blackwood asked mildly. Information has a way of flowing, much like the funds from the Pleiadian Trading Consortium to certain Dominion accounts. Accounts not registered with your Treasury Department, as I understand it. The chamber erupted into chaos. 2 Dominion officers began shouting at each other in their native language, with translation devices, struggling to keep up with the rapid-fire accusations. Drell Korvic attempted to restore order, but his authority seemed to evaporate with each passing moment. Kaal'Vex watched in astonishment as the fearsome Dominion delegation representatives of the military force that had brought the Federation to its knees devolved into internal bickering. Blackwood sat calmly amidst the storm, occasionally dropping another seemingly innocent comment that would reignite the arguments whenever they began to subside. You knew about the Cygnus operation. One officer accused another. And you diverted resources to your clan territories, came the furious response. Drell Korvic slammed his massive fist on the table repeatedly. Silence. You disgraced the Dominion before our enemies. But the damage was done. Centuries of hidden resentments, secret alliances, and buried scandals had been excavated with surgical precision by the humans' carefully chosen words. The Dominion's fearsome facade had cracked, revealing the fragile coalition beneath. As the arguments intensified, Kaal'Vex leaned toward Blackwood. How did you do this? He whispered. Blackwood's expression remained neutral, but there was a gleam in his eyes. I didn't do anything, Admiral. I merely provided a safe space for truth to emerge. Humans understand that the most powerful weapon in the universe isn't a dreadnought or a planet killer. It's the right information, delivered at the right time, in the right way. The Dominion delegation continued to fracture before their eyes, their once unified front now irreparably shattered. The chaos among the Dominion delegation reached a crescendo, then abruptly fell silent as Drell Korvic rose to his full, imposing height. His 4 eyes blazed with fury as he surveyed his fractured command. The tension in the chamber was suffocating. Federation Admiral, Drell Korvic said, his voice unnaturally controlled. The Nexus Dominion offers. He paused, massive jaw clenching so tight that Kaal'Vex could hear the grinding of teeth. The Nexus Dominion offers unconditional surrender, effective immediately. A stunned silence fell over the Federation delegation. Kaal'Vex's 3rd eyelid flickered rapidly, a physiological reaction he couldn't control. His mind struggled to process what he had just heard. Unconditional surrender? From the Dominion? The military force that had conquered 3 galactic sectors and driven the Federation to the brink of extinction? Grand Marshal, Kaal'Vex managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps I misunderstood. You did not, Drell Korvic cut in sharply. We will withdraw from all contested territories. Our fleet will stand down. Reparations can be negotiated. He shot a venomous glance at his officers, who stood with heads bowed in a display of submission. It appears we have internal matters that require our immediate attention. Kaal'Vex turned to Blackwood, whose expression was a masterful blend of surprise and diplomatic satisfaction. "This is an unexpected but welcome development," the human said smoothly. "The Federation accepts your surrender and looks forward to establishing lasting peace between our peoples." As the formal surrender documents were hastily prepared, Kaal'Vex could only stare at the human in wonderment. 17 rotations of brutal warfare, millions of lives lost, countless worlds scarred by conflict, all ended in a single negotiation session because of one human's words. "I don't understand," Kaal'Vex whispered as Blackwood stood beside him. "How is this possible?" Blackwood's smile was enigmatic. "Sometimes winning a war isn't about destroying your enemy, Admiral. It's about helping them realize they've already defeated themselves." Hours later, after the formal surrender had been processed and the Dominion delegation had departed in a cloud of barely contained hostility directed primarily at each other, Kaal'Vex found Blackwood alone in the observation lounge. The human stood silhouetted against the vast starfield, a small figure against the cosmic backdrop. "You weren't just lucky in there," Kaal'Vex said, approaching slowly. "And this wasn't your first time doing something like this." Blackwood turned, a glass of amber liquid from his homeworld in hand. "The Federation fought bravely for 17 rotations, Admiral. I merely helped bring about the inevitable conclusion a bit sooner." "No," Kaal'Vex insisted, his neck frills extending slightly. "I knew every strength and weakness of my enemy after nearly 2 decades of war, yet I couldn't accomplish what you did in a single day. Tell me the truth. Who are you really?" Blackwood regarded him thoughtfully for a moment, then gestured to the stars. "Do you know why humans advance so quickly after achieving space travel? Why we integrated into galactic society with such apparent ease?" "Your adaptability is well documented," Kaal'Vex said cautiously. "It's not just adaptability." Blackwood swirled his drink. "Humans were latecomers to the galactic stage. We knew we couldn't compete technologically, at least not immediately. We couldn't build the biggest ships or the most powerful weapons. So we focused on what we could do better than anyone else." "Psychological warfare," Kaal'Vex murmured. Blackwood nodded. "On Earth, we have these creatures called octopuses, highly intelligent, but physically vulnerable. They survive by understanding their environment and adapting to it better than their predators. Humanity's approach to galactic politics is similar." He set his glass down. "Every diplomatic observer we send out is actually an elite psychological operative trained to understand alien cultures, motivations, and vulnerabilities more deeply than they understand themselves." "So your diplomatic corps is actually an intelligence service? A special warfare branch? A cultural research institution?" Blackwood shrugged. "The distinction doesn't matter to us. Humans learned long ago that warfare isn't just about weapons and territory. It's about understanding minds, whether they evolved on Earth or 1,000 light years away." Kaal'Vex felt a chill run down his spine ridge. "The Galactic Council has no idea, do they? They think they're allowing harmless observers, but they're actually granting access to," he struggled to find the right words, "to the most sophisticated intelligence network in the galaxy," Blackwood finished for him. "Yes, but don't worry, Admiral. Humans bear no ill will toward the Federation. Quite the contrary. We consider you valuable allies." "And if we weren't allies?" Kaal'Vex couldn't help asking. Blackwood's expression remained friendly, but something changed in his eyes, something ancient and calculating that made Kaal'Vex's primitive hindbrain want to flee. "Then today's demonstration might have gone very differently," Blackwood said softly. "We wouldn't need to fire a single shot to bring down your government. We'd simply talk. To the right people, at the right time. About the right things." The casual statement hung in the air between them, more terrifying than any battle fleet. "I'm glad we're allies," Kaal'Vex said finally. "As am I." Blackwood's expression warmed again. I'll be departing for Earth tomorrow to report on the successful conclusion of this conflict. The Federation will find the new peace accord with the Dominion most favorable." As they said their goodbyes, Kaal'Vex watched the small, physically unimposing human walk away. He activated his personal log and dictated a single, urgent entry. Priority directive to all Federation commanders: under no circumstances are we to provoke, threaten, or antagonize humanity or the Human Stellar Alliance. They are to be treated as our most valued allies at all times. The humans have mastered a form of warfare we cannot defend against. They understand us better than we understand ourselves. And may the 7 moons help us all, if they ever decide to truly use that power." He paused, then added one final note. "They don't need warships or dreadnoughts or planet killers. Their most dangerous weapons are their minds. And I suspect we've only glimpsed the surface of what they're truly capable of."